I've called the sermon today Matthew's Surprise Nativity Set. And I want to ask the kids who are present a question. Just the kids. Adults, you know that means up through age 18. Kids, who is in a nativity set? I taught junior high for 3 years. I know how to wait. Who is in a nativity set? Okay, we got Jesus. No extra credit for that one, but we got Jesus. If you must look up at the Lord's table here, you can. Who else is in a nativity set? Mary. Thank you. Who else? Thank you. Who else? There's sheep. Yeah, we don't want to get into all the details as to what animals. Just leave it there. Okay, anything else? I heard wise men. Thank you. I'll call them magi during my sermon today. Who else? Yeah, that night there were shepherds. Yep. Anyone else? Yeah, we got the animals. I think I've heard just about everything. I heard a star, yeah. Coloring pages. That's funny. For not a very funny passage, that was actually funny. But I think there are some things missing. I think that's Matthew's surprise. Best I can tell, there are at least 3 people missing from most nativity sets. I don't know who first thought of the nativity set, but the ones I've seen feel incomplete. Those bumper stickers we often see about keeping Christ in Christmas, they miss it. Family traditions that you are looking forward to, or the ones you're not, probably miss it. Scrolling through posts and short-form videos about Christmas posted by people in Utah, definitely miss it. But these people are right there in our story. Look at all the capital letters, kids. You've got your passage open. 7 times I see a big H for Herod. The story's so rich, I could go on. Ready? I hear of dreams. I hear of people from another land visiting. I hear lots of place names, which means that the writer thinks the places really matter. I hear about precious articles of gold and myrrh. I hear of angels, a comet. I'm kind of on the comet side of the controversy as to whether it was a star or a comet, because it moves. But either way, something in the sky is talking. I hear of a nighttime escape. That's scary. You know, if you leave at night, it's because you're really afraid. You can't sleep through the night. You get everyone up and you move. I hear of a massacre and a dead king. And that doesn't even cover the 6 titles of the main character, who is Jesus. Thank you. Verse 1. Next verse, verse 2, he's called one born King of the Jews. In verse 4, stay with me, he's called Messiah. Thank you. In verse 6, he gets 2 titles, because ruler isn't enough. We've got all kinds of rulers. He's also what? Shepherd. Okay. He's called child in verse 8. He's called God's son in verse 14. And that's not it. I hear about 3 different prophets in one passage, and 2 very important women. Every time women come up in the Bible, they carry a disproportionate amount of importance. We heard of Mary, but who's the other woman Matthew includes? Rachel, that's right. Folks, if you have magi and stars in your nativity set, you need Herod. And if you have Herod, you need Rachel. Now, I admit, this makes Christmas painful. I also think it makes it realistic. This story shows a world of pain, loss, sorrow, and really bad people. Now, maybe this was the very worst choice I could have made today. Maybe we don't think that children should know about bad things. They can't handle bad things. They don't know what to do when dragons appear. They're too weak and frail, and they'll have to face all that stuff anyway. But parents, you can't really tell me that there are no dangerous people in the Christmas story. There's no terrible evil in the world. You know who thinks there is terrible evil in the world? Percy Jackson, Lucy Pevensey, should I go on? Joan of Arc, what was she, 14 when she had her visions? The gospel writer named Matthew, and I agree with Matthew. So would all the people who come in week to week for Grief Share right here. They know there's some really, really hard things to life. And they're probably not looking forward to the holidays. So would anyone here who's suffering online? Many of you are suffering as well. What is God's answer to suffering and evil? What does God do to bring peace, which we've talked about today, into a violent world? Well, I'll tell you. Here's the main idea of what Matthew's saying. In all 18 verses, if you boiled it down and picked it out and looked at it, it would say this. In keeping with prophecy, Jesus brings God's peace to a world that doesn't want it. Ugh. That's the story. Let's go through the figures one at a time to really nail this home. The first figure you gotta add to your nativity set is Herod. I don't know how you're going to make this, but it's got to go in there. Verses 1 through 12. You know he is ethnically part Israelite, right? But he's all fearful and a bully. He's already killed his 2 sons. He killed his first wife with his own hands. He was, let me explain it, an old man with the emotional life of a child. And this is no offense to you kids. You just haven't been around very long to learn how to grow that inner life, to understand your emotions, or to see their good purpose. They're made by God. But you will, you have to. The alternative is to live like Herod. That's what Herod was like. He needs to be part of your nativity. But we wouldn't know Herod if it wasn't for the Magi. Verse 1 mentions Magi. That's where we get the word for magician, right? You notice that? These are guys from far away to the east, we don't really know where, who kind of did what God said not to do, which was to study the stars and planets for updates on world news. I kid you not. That's actually what they were doing. These were the last people in the world who would ever be seen taking a caravan into a small Jewish village, which means it's probably true that they visited. They're already in your nativity set. I see them over here on this one. They come to Jerusalem and they ask, completely honestly, where's the newborn king? The newborn king of the Jews. We go to the place where all the Jews are, and then we go to the capital there, and we ask, where's the one born king of the Jews? There's a problem with the question. You ever noticed it? There has never been a person in human history who has been born king or born queen. It just doesn't happen. There's elaborate ceremonies to make sure these things are all very clear, where the crown is placed on the head by someone. Right? You can't be born a king unless you're this one. And no one's been born king or born queen ever since. I wonder what they saw when they looked up at the stars anyway. Well, that's for another sermon, but here's what they did. That day they went straight to Herod's palace, and they imagine, of course, that there's a 2-year-old or so coming out to them and going to greet them, and they're able to greet him. And in fact, what happens is not at all what they expect. Here comes an old man who has got something on his schedule he did not plan. You can imagine what they say to each other under their breath. Wait, he is way too old to be born lately. Put those gifts away. We don't want to waste them. Did you see the look on his face? He doesn't know anything about a baby-born king in his own realm. Why are there armed guards everywhere? Well, in verse 3, we hear why. Herod freaks out. In fact, all of Jerusalem does. They know what he's like. He summons the leaders of the people, and he asks them where the promised one was to be born. You'd think he would have studied this before he got there. They all knew the answer. This hurts. The same town near where Rachel died, way back in the book of Genesis. Oh, so yeah. The same town where King David was from, sort of the height of Israel's, kingly story. So he calls the Magi back in secret, not with the people's leaders. And he says, please go visit, and then come back and tell me where he is so I can go and worship him as well. But I'm guessing the Magi were beginning to wonder who this person was. The Magi travel, and if they traveled at night, that was normal. It was a little cooler. And they're shocked to see the same star, same exact one. And somehow it comes over the village. Somehow they find the house. And Matthew says they see the baby and his mother, so we know they got the right place. And they bow down. And then they hand over these huge amounts of commodities. I mean, heavy commodity. Gold, frankincense, myrrh. They planned this whole thing out. You know, if you were invited to the governor's office tomorrow, you would have made a plan to bring something special from Narberth with you to give to the governor. And he has a plan for accepting such things and making sure he gets a thank you note out and so forth and so on. The gifts are bright. They're happy, like gold. They're dark and mysterious and kind of weird, like myrrh and frankincense. This is heavy, smelly stuff, typically used for embalming a dead body. I don't know what Mary and Joseph did with it, and I don't know how Jesus, the 2-year-old, responds to all these strangers who probably aren't Jewish, who look different, they smell different. Maybe they didn't do everything right. Maybe they didn't wash their hands if they ate together. I don't know what happened to Jesus that day, right? I don't know the way he's thinking or feeling, because we don't know. I do know the way he responds to different people in his life and ministry. I also know that Jesus will know very soon that he is not just king of the Jewish people. He's king of the whole world. And lo and behold, the Magi get that. Most of Israel's leaders did not. They could have gone with, they didn't. And the next day, the Magi leave from their brief visit, and they went home another way from the way they arrived. Whew. What do we say about this? Well, I think for one, if you choose to refuse to worship Jesus, it isn't just honest or a choice. It's to be just like God's people's leaders back then. Hard-hearted, which is what they described Pharaoh as being, remember? And hard-heartedness doesn't magically get better over time. Because within just a few years, we hear of these same leaders again, don't we? We do. And where are they? Well, they're with everyone else shouting for this now child, then man, to be crucified. Well, Matthew introduces them way back here. There's someone else in the crowd that day. Interesting, isn't there? Herod had a son he didn't kill, and he named him Herod. And Herod was there to crucify Jesus too. So Herod stands for all of God's people. I know it's a harsh pill, but that Jesus came at all is a testament to God's love for Herod too. And Herod deserves to be in your nativity. Then there's Rachel. We only get one reference to her there all the way down in verse 18. And you may have been distracted by the time the reader was finished thinking, what in the world is going on in this passage? I never read this before. This isn't in Luke. That's right. Well, that night, the Magi came. That night, Joseph has a dream in verse 13. An angel of the Lord shows up and says, get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt. This is the last place that Joseph wanted to go. This is the last place that he had time or energy or interest in leaving for. It would be like if you put on your shoes right now and walk to Lancaster County, 75 miles away. Or, if you had to, you walk all the way up the Jersey Turnpike to Newark. or south to the Maryland border. That's what they did, folks. Matthew tells us that while they were there, someone died. And a relief, it wasn't Jesus, it was Herod, the old vicious king back in the land. And in verse 15, we learn that Jesus will come back to God's land of promise, just like the Hebrews left Egypt many years earlier. So Jesus, get this, is going to personally, firsthand, know the pain of God's people in the wilderness and in exile. It's why Jesus doesn't fit easily around the rich, the know-it-alls, the fearful, the ones who should know better but don't, the bullies, and adults who act like children. Jesus does spend time with the poor, the nameless, demon-possessed, and the weak, who often aren't really clear about who Jesus is, but they're trying. Herod finds out that the Magi went home a different way, and Craig Keener, who used to teach around here, tells us it must have been the next day. He sends orders to his troops. And by the way, we think Bethlehem had some sort of a fortress near it. Ben would know better. So it's only about 4 or 5 miles from Jerusalem. And he tells them, how about writing this order out, right? Find any boy age 2 or younger and kill them. There's no oversight. There's no courts. Come on. This is just plain vicious. And it causes trauma. When things happen to you physically and mentally and emotionally or spiritually that you're not ready to handle, right? You get swamped. Your emotions are overwhelmed. You kind of freeze up. What are these families supposed to do? Get compensation from the state? The village would have heard about it. The region would have heard about it. The nation would have heard about it. Matthew wasn't born at the time, but he sure heard about it. Can anyone explain what happened that day? And that's not a question I'm looking for you to shout out answers for. I'm asking it so that you think about it. Who can explain these kinds of things? Who could try? Maybe you're anxious and you think, well, he's not saying God is bad. Nope, I didn't say that. But I am expressing serious confusion. I don't understand. Look, the Son of God lives, but all these little boys who are innocent, they die? Couldn't this have been avoided? Send an angel to all those families too. No. You know, sometimes Christians miss out on all the blessings that God gives to people who may or may not follow Jesus at all in the world of pop culture. And one of my favorite singers, a British guy named Sam Fender, wrote a frightening song back in 2018 because he was frightened. It's called Dead Boys. In fact, he wrote it many years earlier and just didn't know what to do with it. Do I publish this? I mean, this is going to make me seem so weird. And he did. Here's the chorus. You ready for how close this hews? He's not talking about the massacre of the innocents. He's talking about, where are my friends I grew up with in my hometown that aren't here anymore? For all kinds of reasons, they're gone. And he sings, we close our eyes and learn our pain. No one could ever explain all the dead boys in our hometown. I don't know if Sam Fender follows Jesus. I just see a huge line between the two. God preserved God's son. God did not rescue those little boys. I'm confused. And when I'm confused, I notice the things I can really be sure of. And on the one side is just how vicious Herod is. He reminds me of a human who has become a dragon, all wrath and bitterness and hardness. On the other side, here's our new figure, Rachel. By the time our sad matriarch Rachel, fourth wife of our father Jacob. By the time she was almost gone, she had lived a very hard and sad life. They are now traveling, and on the road, she is suddenly gripped with labor pains. And on the road, she realizes, this baby's coming, my second. I gotta give birth right now. All the women gather around. And finally, even though she is on the verge of dying, one of the nursemaids yells out, "It's a boy." And Rachel's a little bit surer that her life wasn't a total loss because she had already lost a boy, interestingly named Joseph. She would never see him again. And as the baby comes out, she names it. Women don't name babies in the Bible. She names it. She calls him Benoni, son of my sorrow. I am so sad I'm giving birth to sorrow. That's what she's saying. That's powerful. Someone wrote it down. Someone remembered it. And by the time they presented it to Jacob, Jacob did what any normal person would do. This is great, I have a son. Another one. I can't call him Benoni. I'm going to call him Benjamin instead. The 12th of the 12 sons of Jacob. And her death was so traumatic for that moment in Genesis 35 that when Jeremiah, years later, watches the exiles walking, shuffling past him on the way to Babylon, he says, "What can I do to show how serious and sad this is? I'm going to draw from Genesis and place it right here." And he does. Now Rachel is somehow brought back to life, screaming and wailing at the losses Israel faces. What does Matthew do when faced with something similar? He doesn't just say, "It's fine." He doesn't just say, "Hey, we'll get over it. Jesus is going to win in the end." He goes back to what Jeremiah does, and he places it here in our reading. Rachel is weeping. You can hear it. She will not be comforted. Don't tell her everything's going to be okay. She has lost her sons. Let Rachel teach you how to respond to pain. You cannot endure responding to pain the way Herod does, which is deny it, reframe it, or go after it and attack it, shame it, hate it, and protect yourself at all costs. That hasn't worked for you yet because it's not the way our hearts are wired. Rachel's response to her suffering looks and sounds very weak. No one wants to be sad over Christmas or ever. I don't ever want to be sad if I don't have to be. But I am learning to receive sorrow from God, not just fight it. Matthew includes Rachel weeping here. So Rachel, loved by God, goes into our nativity scene. I said there were 3 missing. The third, no surprise, is you, or me. It's all of us. When you see a nativity scene, don't just add Herod to it. Don't just add Rachel to it. You want to see yourself in that scene. What in the world would I have done at the time? Well, how am I responding to Jesus right now? Matthew writes this down so that you see yourself as part of it. He's not writing it down as a news report. It's about Jesus calling you now. Let me appeal further to you, especially children. Jesus is worth following for his combination, power and love. You know in the story who has just power and no love, right? Do you want to live like that? No. Is it tempting to? Yes. Is that the way a lot of people function? Yes, that's a lot. But that's not the way Jesus functions. It's power and love. That's why he's safe. That's one of the reasons I follow him. There's another we see in this story. Jesus faces trauma as a child and understands your struggles, losses, pain, and strong emotions. It doesn't get better for Jesus either. You notice that Jesus doesn't laugh in any of the stories we have of him, right? And I wonder sometimes, how hard was this sojourn for him? Well, here's what matters to me. I follow Jesus because when I am sad, he is not angry at me. When I face losses, even for my own bad decisions, Jesus is there. He understands. If I face trauma, and by the way, I face a lot of that indirectly as a hospital chaplain. You know, it's the worst day of someone's life. Hi, I'm Erik. I'm a hospital chaplain. Can I help you? Well, Jesus understands. In fact, it's like he moves toward these things. That's a reason to follow him. And Jesus faced a violent world. Jesus faced a violent world and overcame it, guess how? By the weakness of faith in God's promises, not by violence and rage. The violence and rage is all on the other side, and he will be affected by it. For our sake, for your sake, this Christmas. How do we overcome a violent world? Well, we don't imitate it. The weakness of faith in God's promises, even if that includes weeping, and it will. Jesus brought God's peace into a world that doesn't want it, but God still wins. He suffered. I, his follower, will suffer too. How Jesus led is therefore how I have to lead, right? Whether I'm a dad or a teacher or whatever I'm doing, I don't just make up however I lead. I lead like Jesus. How he connects with people is how I learn to connect with people, right? How he grew up outside and inside. I must grow up on my inside too. I cannot be a child anymore in my emotional responses to everything. Maybe this passage even stirs something in you here at Narberth to move toward that person or that couple that has hurt or bothered you in the past few months. Well, maybe it can wait till Christmas is over. Maybe that's kind of the whole point of Christmas. Maybe you can take a step toward them gently, thoughtfully, with advice, and offer to sit down and just have a conversation about what happened and trust God for the outcome. For homework, kids, I challenge you to go to Genesis 35 and read about how Rachel died and see some of the things I might have not covered. But if you're especially courageous, and it's a scary passage, I would look to Revelation 14, Revelation chapter 14, because guess what you see there? Oh, a woman giving birth to a child who's facing a dragon. And if you want to talk about it, I'd be glad to. Let me pray God's blessing on my preaching of the word today. Jesus, you've come as a person, and therefore you know so much of what we endure. We bless and honor you today for the mystery of your incarnation, for this unbelievable account of you nearly dying at age 2. We don't like this at all, and we ask that you would support us as we think back through what we heard today. I pray for honest questions, and I pray that when we don't know the answer, we would say, I don't know. And God, I pray that you would protect us in a violent world. Would you strengthen our faith in your promises and help us see that Jesus' way is the best way and is our only hope. We thank you for enduring the violence of this world and ask that you give us soft hearts this season in every way. We pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.